Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Charmers Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for post-Lightning Overdrive. With the release of the latest Yu-Gi-Oh! Set, we were given the latest in the Familiar Possessed Link monsters, being Lena, the Light Attribute Familiar Possessed, and I figured an update to the deck was due. I actually can't recall if I ever made an update to the deck post the Spirit Charmers Structure deck, but with all that new support we received for the deck, I definitely feel an update was due for the channel, and who knows, later down the road when we get the Dark Attribute Familiar Possessed Link monster, that'll just mean another update to the deck, because we're also still missing a few of the monsters that the Familiar Possessed use in their card arts. I believe we just have the 4 initial attributes, being Fire, Water, Wind, and Earth. So if we get Light and Dark also down the road, it just means more support for the deck altogether. This deck will also be more of a focus on the Light Attribute monsters in the deck, so that's why Lena will be the main focus, and just overall better card to go with for the special summoning. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the Familiar Possessed monsters, like I said, being the main focus in the deck, we're running 3 Familiar Possessed Lena. You can special summon this card from your hand by sending from your deck or face up Lena, the Light Charmer you control, and 1 face up Light monster to the graveyard. Just when summoned this way, you can add 1 spellcaster type monster with 1500 defense from your deck to your hand, except for Familiar Possessed Lena. And if this card is special summoned by this effect, when it attacks a defense monster, you inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. So what's great about Lena and Dark is that they have different search power for being able to add additional monsters when summoned this way. It's an option to go for. It doesn't happen often because most of the time we rely on just our spells and traps to summon these cards out into the field, but better, I would say, than some of the other Familiar Possessed that we run in the deck, which are just in the deck for the additional attribute options. And like I said, focusing on 3 Lena, since it's the newest card with the Light Attribute Link monster that we received in the Lightning Overdrive booster set. For the other Familiar Possessed monsters, just running 1 of each, so 1 Familiar Possessed Dark, having the same monster effects as Lena, just with the Familiar Possessed Dark option. Also 1 Hita, 1 Asa, 1 Win, and 1 Area for the remainder of the monsters. Now, you can mix around these numbers how you want, but like I said, the main focus for the deck was Familiar Possessed Lena, so that's why we're running 3 of this card. And with these cards having plenty of search options in the deck, I really feel you only need to run 1 of each additional copy altogether. For the Earth Charmer and all the other different ones, we are running 1 Asa, the Earth Charmer, 1 Area, the Water Charmer, 1 Win, the Wind Charmer, 1 Hita, the Fire Charmer, and 1 Dark, the Dark Charmer. Now, sadly, I didn't have any of Lena, the Light Charmer. I think it's just a much more difficult card to get a hold of for working with Familiar Possessed Lena. So if you wanted to add that card into the deck, you can take out any number of additional Charmer monsters you run in the deck and put in Lena, the Light Charmer. It's just that substitute, and like I said, it's more of a focus for the Familiar Possessed deck, focusing on Lena. So if you want to just take out any number to get a full playset, just choose the tribute depending on the type of deck you want to build and what type of Familiar Possessed deck you want to go up against your opponent with, using more of these monsters depending on the type of deck you'll go up against and the type of tribute your opponent's monsters will be using. And then for the Awakening of the Possessed monsters, I run 1 Awakening of the Possessed Inari and 1 Archfiend. Both of these monsters just having more special summon options and additional monster effects when summoned onto the field for their special summons. Just 1 of each, I feel, is all you need in the deck. Also, being more of a powerhouse monster, but more situational to get out onto the field. Sadly, there isn't a Light Attribute Awakening of the Possessed, but when we do hopefully get it later down the road, it'll definitely work well with a deck that's more focused on Familiar Possessed Lena, with our main focus of this deck profile, like I said, being that play. For some of the lower level ones, I also run 1 Gigabyte, 1 Nefariousness, and 1 Inari Fire. All level 4 monsters, focusing on special summoning out onto the field when you have a spellcaster type monster. What's great is that it just helps to contribute to the different special summons with these cards, and then being able to either go for an Xyz play, since they are level 4s, just like the Familiar Possessed, or even just being able to go into additional link plays, just needing the tribute of the Familiar Possessed Charmer you have on the field, and also the additional monster you may have, just needing to be 1 other generic one also. And then for the rest of the monsters in the main deck, I run 2 Fairy Tale Luna. Now, this is just more search power. If you wanted to run a third copy of Fairy Tale Luna, you can take out one of the other pets of the familiar possessed monsters and add in a third copy of this card, just being search power for any of the familiar possessed monsters. Since Luna searches out a monster with 1850 attack, you can search out any of them that you need for that particular play, and being able to bounce Fairy Tale Luna back to your hand and make your opponent either send a card from their main deck or extra deck of the same card of one they control, otherwise bouncing it back can just mean another card for you to resummon onto the field and then getting rid of a resource your opponent may have if they only run one copy of that card in the deck. But that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. Ideally, I do want to run 3 Spirit Charmers. It is a quick play spell searcher. You discard 1 card and add 2 cards from your deck with different names from each other that are basically Charmer monsters, familiar possessed monsters, and or possessed spell or traps, and add 1 of them to your hand and set the other one on the field. So what's great about this card is the discard is a big cost, but it makes up for the spell search and the card you discarded, being able to add 1 of the familiar possessed to your hand. And then if you search another one being a Charmer, setting that one on the field, or even if you searched a spell or trap, setting that card up gives you the monster needed with this spell card, and then just an additional card on the field for you to use. Having those 2 monsters means that next turn, if you flip it up, you can take control of one of your opponent's monsters and use that for another Charmer play. For the continuous spell, I am also running 3 Awakening of the Possessed. Basically with this one, monsters you control gain 300 attack for each different attribute you control, which is a good number since we're running all different attributes in this deck. And also, any familiar possessed monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. If a spellcaster type monster with 1850 original attack is normal or special summon to your field, you draw 1 card. You can use this effect of Awakening of the Possessed once per turn. So it works with any of the familiar possessed and not just the attribute to see on the card. Working very well with Lena and Dark as well. So when you summon this card, you draw a card, boosting up their attack to a pretty good number that can hit over a good majority of cards your opponent may have, and then just being able to protect them from your opponent's card effects. I run 3 of this card just because I always like to see it set up as an option on the field for that protection, and then just more and more draw power because you're going to invest a lot in your different plays you may have going up against your opponent, and you just want good ways to recover against that. For the other spell, I also run 2 Grand Spiritual Art Ichirin. The field spell, you negate your opponent's first monster effect that resolves each turn while you control a spellcaster monster with 1500 defense. And during your main phase, you can reveal 1 spellcaster monster from your hand. If you do, add 1 monster with the same attribute, but 1500 attack and 200 defense from your deck to your hand. And if you do, shuffle that revealed monster into the deck. You're going to use each effect of Grand Spiritual Art Ichirin once per turn. So the 1500 attack and 200 is more searching for the different pets of the familiar possessed monsters, giving you that option. There's a good variety to search for. I thought of running the field spell as well, but I really feel you can search this card out with some of the other setup you have, and you really only need the 2. It's more of a setup card for the additional support for the familiar possessed monsters and not the actual familiar possessed monsters altogether. For the other spells, I run 1 Call by the Grave and 1 Monster Reborn just for additional special summon power and shutting out our opponent's graveyard plays. If you wanted to run the Terraforming for the Ichirin, you can take out the Call by the Grave for that spot, but that's also player preference down to that point. And that is it for the spells. We'll now move on to the traps. For the traps, I run 2 Possessed Partnerships. You special summon 1 spellcaster monster with 1500 defense from your hand or graveyard in attack position or face down defense position. And then if you control monsters with 2 or more different attributes, you can destroy 1 face-up card on the field. And you can banish this card from your graveyard to target 1 of your possessed continuous spell or traps in your graveyard. Place it face up on the field. You can only use this Possessed Partnerships effect this turn and only once that turn. So with this, you have more search power for all your different possessed cards, depending on which one you want to activate, and that just gives you more and more setup using this card and all the different attribute monsters you may run in the deck. For the other support, I also run 2 Unpossessed. It still has Possessed in the name, so remember that. Continuous trap. Charmer monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle, and if a familiar possessed monster you control attacks an opponent's monster, it gains 800 attack, and during damage calculation, if a monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon one spellcaster monster with 1500 defense from your deck whose attribute is different from that monster. So with the different attributes, you get more and more special summonings, but with the boost of your Awakening of the Possessed, it just gives you more of a power boost with your different familiar possessed monsters you run in the deck when attacking into your opponent. But I really feel you only need 2 though. Once you get this 1 card set up, and the fact that it is recyclable from the graveyard using some of our other traps makes just for that much of an easier setup. For more of the different attribute power in the deck, I also like to still run the 2 DNA Transplant. This comes into mind just for the fact that I am running the Charmers in the deck, so when you flip them up and you don't have the particular attribute on your opponent's field, being able to use DNA Transplant will change the Charmer itself, but you'll be able to take that opponent's monster and then just make use of it for that fact when you have that specific type change on the field. And then going off of that, can also shut down some of your opponent's plays depending on the type of attribute you declare with this card and what they want to use. And then for the rest of the trap lineup, I just run 2 Solemn Judgment and 2 Solemn Strike, additional back row, along with all the traps we're already running in the deck, just for that easy setup, being able to set this card if our opponent summons a monster that we just need to get rid of that much more easily. Just being able to activate this, along with more of the other shutdown cards we run in the deck, can be an easy card to rely on for those plays altogether. And that is it for the main deck. When I move on to the extra deck, I run 2 of the new Lena the Light Charmer Lustrous, just like all the other different Charmer monsters for the extra deck. This card's always treated as a familiar possessed card, and also with this one being more of the light attribute focus. With this one, you can summon out a different type light monster from your opponent's graveyard, while all the other ones focus on their own attributes. So with this, you have more of a reach of different cards you can summon from your opponent's graveyard to your field. Since there are a lot more decks with light monsters in it than I would say with some of the other attributes we're running in the decks also. With those other Charmers being 1 Heat of the Fire Charmer Ablaze, 1 Asa the Earth Charmer Immovable, 1 Wind the Wind Charmer Verdant, and 1 Area the Water Charmer Gentle. Just one of each of these cards. Like I said, Lena is the main focus, being the newest support. So 2 of this card, and you can go for a good majority of these cards with the additional special summon power we run in the deck and all of our plays we can go for. For more of the generic support that we run for the Link monsters, I also run 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Barricade Board Blocker to work with our field spell and continuous spells, 1 IP Masquerena, just being able to use what attributes we have on the field to then go into an additional Charmer monster from the extra deck. Can really mess up our opponent's plays by taking one of those monsters during their own turn. 1 Nightmare Unicorn, 1 Boral Sword Dragon, and 1 Borreload Dragon to finish off the Link monsters. And for the Xyz monsters, I run 1 Tornado Dragon and 1 Gaga Cowboy, just some rank 4 plays to go into, since we do run a good majority of different level 4 monsters that can easily be special summoned out onto the field and then overlaid into. And then as for some of the go-to plays, control is a big part of the deck. If you have your trap and your spell set up, you then just have a powerhouse of a familiar possessed monster on the field to use against your opponent, hitting some big numbers, almost close to 3,000 against your opponent. But also some of your other plays to rely on are basically going with your Spirit Charmers spell, discarding a card, searching your deck for 2 different cards, whether they be one of the spells I mentioned before, but you can go for one of your familiar possessed, and then also one of the Charmer monsters, which if you have Lena the Light Charmer in the deck, you can also set that card up, and then just special summon familiar possessed Lena from the deck after you take one of your opponent's monsters with that card and use it yourself. But you can just set up that card, and then going for the different attribute can give you the monster you'll take from your opponent on the field, and then you can use those 2 monsters to then go into one of your extra deck monsters, and also just take one of your opponent's other different attribute monsters from their graveyard onto the field to give you more and more extra deck plays to go into. With also more of a setup in mind for being able to take your opponent's cards, you go for more of the special summon play and the fact that the different pets can be special summoned out as long as you control the spellcaster type monster. So even with Lena and these different attributes, you can still summon out one of those monsters on the field and then go for the Link summon of choice, since you only need the 1 light attribute monster. Since it just has 2 monsters, including a light attribute monster, if you didn't want to go for this play, there's always the option of the Xyz play, just being an easy special summon with your different familiar possessed pet monsters. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, definitely glad I got around to making an update to the Charmers deck. It's definitely a fun one, and one that a while back I was surprised we got support in the form of a new structure deck. I'm sure we'll see more support for it later on down the road as well. But until then, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.